Good afternoon. Welcome to the Los Angeles Times. I'm Times columnist Pat Morrison as we talk about the repercussions of the decision today from the United States Supreme Court overturning almost 50 years of precedent, saying there is no federally guaranteed constitutional right to abortion, that it's up to the states to decide what rights they will extend to the women living within their borders. Earlier today, we heard about what California is doing, joining what is called the West Coast Offense with Oregon and with Washington to unite to defend a woman's right to abortion in those states and do what can be done legislatively, even constitutionally, to protect those rights. But now we're going to be talking about the states in the South, one of which, Mississippi, had the case that was taken to the Supreme Court that ended up pulling the plug on Roe versus Wade. Jenny Jarvie is a Los Angeles Times national correspondent in Atlanta, joining us to talk about that. Thank you, Jenny, for being here.
My pleasure.
The word that I think you described for this was chaos, as all of the states in the South, which I think pretty close to universally are against abortion to one degree or another. It just depends on the number of weeks and whether or not rape or incest will be covered in the exemptions to abortion. What's happening right now?
It's different in red states across this country. So, there's 26 states that are set to ban abortion or put severe restrictions on abortion, but it's what's happening in one state is not exactly the same as another. So you have, in a state like Alabama, you have clinics just stopping performing abortion procedures this morning immediately and calling up people who have appointments over the next week to get them to go to Georgia because Alabama has a pre-Roe ban currently on the books that would they worry will go into effect immediately. In Georgia,
it's still legal
also,
in Georgia?
Yeah, go on.
I'm sorry, it's still legal in Georgia?
Well, Georgia did pass a law in 2019 which effectively banned abortions after 6 weeks, but it was blocked by courts, and it may take a little bit of time for that to go into effect. So essentially, we're waiting. So the clinics there say they're going to continue, and they are, waiting. It could be a matter of weeks or months before abortion is banned there. And so if that's the case, then the people in Alabama and Georgia will then have to go further afield, maybe to Florida, but Florida, also maybe potentially sort of changing its law this summer. So, then it would be North Carolina. And so it's going to evolve throughout the summer.
The state of Missouri, first thing after the ruling this morning was released by the Supreme Court, the officials there announced that they were signing into effect a ban on abortion in the state of Missouri. And in Texas, the governor, Greg Abbott, sent state employees home as a celebration of the Roe versus Wade decision. So we see kind of a new version of what we call the Solid South, the political Solid South in that sense, and trying to affect to one degree or another these bans that will go into effect, some immediately and some later on, as you were talking about. There are already consequences and concerns. President Biden today said that extremist governors and state legislators who are looking to block the mail or search a person's medicine cabinet or control a woman's actions by tracking data on her apps she uses are wrong and extreme and out of touch with the majority of Americans, which raises the question that has already been discussed in advance in the abstract, in advance of this ruling. Can these states, will they even try to, for example, control the movements of women out of their states? Will they try to control telemedicine? Will they try to regulate mails that may be bringing abortion pills into those states?
Yeah, I mean, I think many states will. I think Texas will. And, for our story, I wrote a story with Molly Hennessy Fisk in Texas, but we spoke to a Texas Right to Life policy director who said that is definitely what they're going to, and they're going to be sort of, if there are prosecutors in sort of liberal enclaves of Texas, they will be trying to sort of bypass them and take other methods to do it. But yeah, I think that definitely will be a factor. I mean, I've spoken with people who do help women access abortions, somebody from the Midwest Coalition, Alliance Coalition, who said, some of her co-workers are worried about even doing this work because, they fear of being arrested or of prosecution. but there's still a lot that's unknown. We don't know exactly the lengths that prosecutors can go to, and we don't know, just the extent to which they can clamp down on this kind of activity.
Because so much of this is federal. The U.S. mails are federally operated. Telemedicine crosses state lines and may deal with federal laws rather than state laws. And so we may see round after round of these matters coming back to the federal courts again as to how the states choose to enforce this.
Right. And, and I've spoken to activists from the Mississippi Reproductive rights group who say basically they don't think that they can really, they're not that worried because they don't think this can really be enforced. It's sort of medication abortion, restricting medication access via mail. But certainly there's a lot of questions and there's a lot up for grabs.
You have talked to people who are on the ground, who are providers, who are involved with clinics in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and I think that last clinic, the Jackson Women's Health Clinic in Mississippi, we'll be talking about this later today if they've not begun already. What are you hearing about the practicalities of people who, up until now, have legally, under some restrictions, been providing abortions?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. I mean, in Jackson, the clinic owner there has already made plans to set up a clinic in New Mexico, across, on the border of New Mexico. So she would like to keep, she says she would like to keep the last clinic in Mississippi open, but she just doesn't know about the future of that. So she's making other plans to open up clinics in other states. But, she's been working for nearly 50 years in abortion care. So for her, this is a significant defeat and a real sort of failure for women in Mississippi and across the country. And in Tuscaloosa, I mean when I spoke this morning, I mean they really just found, the clinic operator there had just found out and was really just trying to deal with the practicalities. They already had a plan to kind of stop and then send people with appointments to Atlanta, but even just arranging the logistics of that are quite complicated, and arranging for the funding and gas, they're arranging gas money and things like that for them to get to Atlanta.
Had you heard of clinics where women who had appointments were actually showing up today to be turned away?
It's kind of complicated because the Tuscaloosa clinic, that would have happened, but they had an emergency. Their doctor had an emergency, so wasn't actually performing abortions this week. So the people that were there today were just getting counseling and ultrasounds, and they did continue to do that work. I imagine that the like a neighboring clinic in Huntsville would have stopped abortion. So yeah, I'm absolutely sure that would be happening in various states.
I'm wondering what's happening in clinics where the clinic itself provides a vast array of reproductive rights care, and not just about abortions, whether they're concerned about operating even within the limits of the law and the kind of scrutiny they're going to face.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely is a question. And this Tuscaloosa clinic it is going to stay open. I mean, it plans to stay open for at least 3 more months. It's secured the funding for that, and the clinic operator hopes to sort of provide contraception, provide after abortion care for people who may do their own, perform their own abortions or travel, and then something potentially goes wrong. But yeah, they do have questions about just the extent to which the state will clamp down on that, or how that's going to play out.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made a point this morning that this is going to be, even though it's not a name or candidate's name on a ballot, it will be the issue in the November midterm elections. What are you seeing and hearing from politicians, especially in Georgia, where there are a lot of, as seems like always nowadays, a lot of big races in Georgia with a lot on the line, and some pretty close races as well?
Yeah, I think Georgia's a really interesting one because although Georgia Republican legislators passed a 6-week ban, it doesn't have overwhelming support among the people, and we've seen that Georgia is a clearly contested state. So I think there's going to be it's going to be very difficult for Republicans who are maybe more moderate and in the suburbs. It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out, just in what kind of stance they strike. Because, talking to abortion to anti-abortion activists, I mean, they are prepared to go further and further and further and get to the point where abortion is illegal across the nation outright. And it's going to be interesting to see how the public, in Georgia and obviously in other states, sort of challenge that, month by month, and particularly in the November elections.
Are there any echoes either in the template of activities or just the resonance of the days of civil rights when your rights essentially depended on your zip code, where you lived in the country or in even parts of the southern United States, that this is a battle that in some ways has been fought before on a different topic, but some of the tactics and the concerns may be the same?
Mm. And I think in relation to that, I mean, it's not even just sort of red states versus blue states. I mean, I think the challenges will be most felt in rural areas of states like Mississippi, Alabama, where just the logistics of getting to a clinic in Chicago or even New Mexico are just, there's just so many hurdles in that, if you don't have a car, if you if you have 2 part-time jobs and you can't get time off, if you have 3 kids and you can't get childcare, it's not, for many people living in Los Angeles or New York, just hopping on a plane is just something they do once a week or once a month. But many people in rural areas, that is not a normal thing to do, and it requires not just flying from one city to the next, but flying through multiple cities to get to, a city like Chicago. So it's just, so I think the burden is mostly going to be felt in rural areas, in poor areas of red states, particularly southern states.
And some of that was the case even when Roe versus Wade was legal and enforceable as the law of the land. And in California, too, there are rural areas where it's virtually impossible to find an abortion provider. And the city may be much closer and much more accessible, but there is time and there is expense that does fall unduly upon poor women. Yeah, no, and that's definitely the case. And talking to most abortion fund leaders or even clinic managers, I mean, they'll tell you, like, this isn't, the problem hasn't started today. This is there have been restriction upon restriction in many of these red states over the course of, more than a decade, which have made things, Mississippi is now down to 1 abortion clinic, and that very well may close. So yeah, this is not a new situation, but it is definitely getting more. It's getting harder and harder to access care. You also heard from the head of the Susan B. Anthony Group, which is at least has anti-abortion positions in its platform. What is that group saying about what now and what next? Yeah, I mean, she obviously feels like she scored a major victory. I mean, she's the woman who secured the pledge from Trump to appoint Supreme Court justices. So she played a major role in this moment, and she is. She is saying this now goes to the states, but at the same time, I think she, and at the same time, she is she's already spoken to various Republican nominees about, their abortion stance in the upcoming election, including President Trump. So I think she's very much thinking, or she's, saying she's thinking about a nationwide abortion ban. Of course, that would be hard with a, that's going to be a harder thing than just sort of doing this state by state. But that is the ultimate goal. This morning at the Supreme Court, over the course of the morning, thousands of protesters collected in front of the Supreme Court building. Have you been seeing or hearing of any protests, or one way or the other, in any of the state houses across the South? Yeah, I'll be going to one, I think, this afternoon in Atlanta. It's not at a state house. I think it's going to be outside the CNN Center. But yeah, there are protests. There are going to be protests all in red states across the country. Yeah. And looking down the road, where do you think the biggest battles are going to be waged on what remains of this in terms of fighting, extending regulations, controlling what women can and cannot do with telemedicine or travel? Which states are going to be the most invested in this battle? I don't know. I mean, obviously Texas struck a really strident stance, and so I think it's going to be at the forefront. I think there are also states like Florida to watch out
for, because, it's going to be an issue, over the summer. And, Georgia's also an interesting state because, it's so politically contested again. And there are real questions about what the public want, and and also how much of an issue this is really going to be. Is this going to be the top issue, or are other economic issues going to take to the fore? I think that is still unknown at this point.
Is it also being debated how much, to what extent, or even whether to criminalize abortion in terms of penalizing the women who have the abortions or the doctors who may now illegally be providing them?
Marjorie Dannenfelser told me that, she's very against penalizing the women. So, and most of the anti-abortion groups are, they make a distinction between penalizing women who access abortion or try to access abortions and the people who help them. So I think most of the effort will be focused on people who try to help them.
We have been talking with Jenny Jarvie. She's a Los Angeles Times national correspondent who has been writing extensively about the future of abortion in anticipation of this ruling from the United States Supreme Court that ends 50 years of a constitutional federal abortion right for women in the United States. She's going to be out and about throughout some of the states that have trigger laws, some of the states that are putting in place new abortion bans in the wake of the Supreme Court decision, or starting up the old ones again, ones that have been on the books in a while. And we'll be hearing back from her at some point, and her reporting you can find on the LA Times website. Jenny, thank you so much. We'll be speaking soon, I hope.
Yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
We want to hear your questions about what happened today, this epical decision by the United States Supreme Court, which, as our Supreme Court correspondent David Savage pointed out, is the first time that the Supreme Court in memory has rolled back a right rather than extending a right. You can get to us via Twitter at LA Times. We'll be looking at your questions, and back at the top of the hour with more of our reporters and their expertise on this matter, and to address some of your questions as well. I'm Pat Morrison. We will see you back then.